the nervous system regulates every single other system in your body. So any system that is in any way involved in your voluntary or involuntary actions is regulated by the nervous system. As we'll see, the only system that can override the nervous system is your endocrine system or your hormone system. So we'll see later in the endocrine section why that is and how that can be. But for your nervous system, we look at the entire system being composed of neurons and the neuroglial cells. So neurons are the basic nerves that you think of all over your body. But what we also have to take into consideration are the neuroglial cells, which are the cells that support those kinds of actions, the nervous impulses, the conduction of information from your brain to the outside environment and back, and how you respond. We do have to consider divisions in your nervous system. The central nervous system includes your spinal cord, and the central nervous system is responsible for relaying and understanding all of the information that you're taking in from both an internal and external environment. We do look at about 250,000 Americans right now with spinal cord injuries, and most often we see these in men and people in their teens and 20s, what many of us refer to as our stupid years. And so we do things that are caused typically by accidents and often are permanent, because what you'll see is most of our nervous system cannot be repaired. If you cut through nerves, if you damage nerves, they're done. That's the end of them. So what is it about this system and its structure that makes the relaying of information so easy for this system to do, but so complicated when we actually think about it? We have 3 different types of input that we've got to look at as far as how you get information into the system, and we'll look more at those in detail. But when we look at our sensory input, or how you actually get information in, it's through what we call effector cells. And I remember this as being away from the point of stimulus. And then you're going to integrate it or understand it in some way and process that through. Now this could be just through your spinal cord, we'll see, or this could also involve brain. So taking information and sending it into the central nervous system for processing. Then we're going to send a response back out. Sending information in and not doing anything with it is pointless. So we send information back out through effector cells, so with an E now. So it's causing an effect on something. I have here a motor response. It does not have to be motor in like moving an arm. It can be a response to a gland to start releasing more hormone. We have all of these things that we can deal with. So just simply bringing in information. So these are our effector cells. And then integrating it, understanding it, sending out a response through the effector cells. Many folks refer to these as sensory and motor neurons. You'll see it interchangeably used. We're going to divide this out first into peripheral versus central nervous system. So the central nervous system, like we said, is brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is everything else. So everything that is not your brain or spinal cord. This includes cranial nerves, spinal nerves. Anything that hangs off of the brain and spinal cord is considered the peripheral nervous system. It's also going to include, generally speaking, nerves. Of course, it's the nervous system. And ganglia. Ganglia, we'll see, are clusters of neurons. And we'll look at how that's different as we go through. So the neurons are the nerve cells themselves. So when we talk about nerve cells, we're really actually talking about neurons. This is what's picking up information and sending out a response. The neuroglia, as I mentioned to you, are everything that support those nerves to do their job. We focus a lot on the myelin sheath, and we'll see this as critical for the conduction of nervous information. We also look at different types of microglia and so on, that oligodendrocytes that are going to support the nerve functioning itself. But like I said, the primary one we will focus on is the myelin sheath, because we look at it in a lot of different diseases and in a lot of different conditions associated with our nervous system. So MS, or multiple sclerosis, is a autoimmune disorder of the central nervous system. So literally, your T cells now are attacking this myelin, or this covering of your central nervous system. So the myelin is actually made of something known as Schwann cells. And so what the T cells are attacking are those Schwann cells in that covering. And the problem is, of course, that if you cut out pieces of this myelin, the myelin's job is to insulate and increase conduction. So how fast do you receive or send a signal? If you chomp it up, if you eat holes in it, what do you think is going to happen? Well, at first, we're going to see what we call arcs in the signal, and essentially what that means is the signal is going to bounce between these spaces. It's not going to conduct smoothly, which means you would have sort of nervous response, ticking sorts of reactions to it. So literally you have short-circuited the system, okay? But what we worry about is the sclerosis part, which is actually referring to the hardening or the scarring of the tissue, of the myelin in particular. So the scarring of that myelin means that it's going to harden, and over time the signal transmission may completely stop. So with our different types of neurons that we mentioned, sensory, we said, is going to conduct information away from the point of stimulus, but it's going to send it to the central nervous system. The interneurons are within the central nervous system. This is going to be brain and spinal cord, right? And then the motor information, or the efferent response, is what's coming back out. So this is sent to the peripheral nervous system for some sort of response. These interneurons will become extremely important later on, and you may want to come back and look at this diagram when we talk about something known as reflex arcs. And that's what this diagram is showing you. You may have been to the doctor and they're testing your reflexes by hitting you with this little rubber mallet, and when they do, what they're looking for is how fast you respond and if you are getting a good response. And what it's looking for is that information going in and a response coming straight back out. When you do this, when you have this done the next time, think about when you actually know that you were hit by the little hammer. Is it while it's happening, or is it after? With our nervous system, we see a lot of instances where we respond before we know anything is even wrong. So the neurons are, of course, highly specialized for carrying signals both into the central nervous system and then back out again in some sort of response fashion. The cell body itself will be a large part of the neuron, but the extensions of the neuron, these dendrites and axons, are what are going to actually conduct signal. The cell body, it'll have a nucleus and all of the normal things you expect to find in a cell, but it's also going to be responsible for collecting signal. Those myelin sheaths that I mentioned to you are going to help us with this conduction and collecting of information by actually enclosing the axons. So when we transmit information through our nerve cell, we actually go from dendrites to a cell body and then out through an axon. The axon is what we're going to look at as being enclosed by these myelin sheaths because we use it as an insulation. If you insulate a wire, why do you do that? Like the plugs you plug into the wall, they're insulated. Why are they insulated? Well, it keeps the signal moving, right? And it keeps it from scattering. And it also increases the speed at which it travels. So in this case, we're interested in the speed of the signal through our nerve to the next nerve. And we see these myelin sheaths covering the axons of nearly every nerve in your body. And like we mentioned, those Schwann cells are actually what make up the myelin sheath. We will look at how nerves interact with one another, but keep in mind that this is typically in an organism a very complex system. Any guesses on what this is? We've got nerves all over the place. Very large nerves in many cases. This is the brain. Any guesses?